What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the first official episode of Magic the Gathering Know-How. Today we're going to be talking about a mono green ramp deck. The idea for this deck was given to me by someone in my Magic the Gathering group that I'm on Facebook. The name of the group is called Magic the Gathering Players Group. If you're interested in joining this group, a link to the group is going to be in the description. This group, we just talk about, Magic cards and commanders and different sets and stuff like that. Give each other helpful ideas and tips of stuff we can possibly do with certain cards or certain decks or anything like that. The name of the person that wanted me to do this, his name is Steve Fassinger. Apologize if I'm butchering that last name. But Steve, this video is for you and anyone else who would like to possibly build a deck like this. So, in my personal opinion, the commander that we're going to be talking about for this deck is going to be Omnath, Locust of Mana. So, Omnath is a 3-drop, power 1, toughness of 1. The best thing about him as a commander is you don't lose unspent green mana as steps and phases end. So, why this is so good is, for example, if you have 5 unspent mana on the field, and let's say your turn is about to end, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to tap all these land. You're not going to use this mana for anything, but because now this is considered unspent mana, Omnath is going to get a +1/+1 for each unspent mana you have. So now he's a 6/6. Then you end your turn, and your mana is still tapped. The floating green mana that you have is still there. It comes back to your turn. You still have this 5 unspent green mana. Omnath is still a 6/6. You come and you untap your forest. Now you have 5 untapped forests and 5 floating mana that's still attached to Omnath. Now you have 10 mana at your disposal. And let's say, you end up putting more lands onto the field with, fetch cards or anything like that. Now you have extra mana to do so. This comes in handy, for example, when you have cards like Rampaging Brontodon. Rampaging Brontodon is a 7-drop. Usually you would just have 5 mana on the field. Now you have 5 extra unspent mana in your mana pool. Now it's easy to just tap 7 mana to bring out Rampaging Brontodon, still leaving you with enough mana floating for Omnath to continue growing. And then, that still comes back around to your turn on the next turn. You don't have anything, to spend your mana on. You don't have anything to tap for. At the end of the turn, you can still tap the mana that you have not yet spent, and Omnath will still grow. You still get that mana in your mana pool, and next turn comes around, does it again. It's just rinse and repeat. It's a way to get Omnath buffed up, and it's also a way to constantly get a large amount of mana for your higher costing spells. Now we're going to go in and we're going to talk about more into what this deck can do. So I don't really have a lot of elves. I probably do. It's probably in my collection of uncommons and commons, but this is just mainly rare stuff or stuff that I've pulled out of my mana ramp deck myself. I don't run a mono green mana ramp deck. I run a blue-green Tatyova deck, but also based around mana ramp. So, a couple of things that I want to throw in there. Any elf mana ramp deck that you're going to run, you're always going to want to have a Nissa Planeswalker in it. Myself personally, I think I have about 3 in mine. I might have 4. No, I have 3 Nissa Planeswalkers in my deck. And the Nissas work very well. For example, Nissa Worldwaker is a 5-drop, comes out with 3 loyalty counters. You +1, target land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with trample, and it's still a land. So now you have a land out that's also a 4/4 creature with trample, and that is a permanent effect. So now that can be popped off every single turn. So every turn you just keep growing 4/4 elemental creatures. She also has another +1 ability, untap up to 4 target forests. So now you have these 4 forests that you just turn into elementals. So let's say you swing with them. You +1 Nissa, you untap those forests. Now they are still 4/4 forests. Now, if you wanted to use them in another way, let's say back to Omnath. You tap these 4 lands, Omnath gains stronger. Or you tap these 4 lands and you cast it for a spell. So Nissas are really good to have in a mana ramp deck because it's always going to help you either build a strong creature or build more mana. Her next 7 ability is search your library for any number of basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Those lands become 4/4 elemental creatures with trample, and they're still lands. So what this is going to be doing for you, this is going to give you an opportunity to pull every single land out of your library and have it on the field. This is going to be great for not only building a humongous amount of mana, but it'll also be great for building an army of elementals. If you add in cards in there that say, let's say lands are indestructible, now you have an army of 4/4 elemental indestructible lands with trample that you can either use for mana, or you can use for creatures, or you can use to buff up your commander, which would be Omnath. Another Nissa is Nissa Who Shakes the World. She has a static ability, is whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional forest. So now it's basically 1 forest is tapping for 2 forests. So this is going to be a really good thing to have. You don't even have to use her abilities. Her static ability is good all by itself. But you could also use her +1 ability. It's put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control. Untap it. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste that's still a land. This is also a permanent effect, just like Nissa Worldwaker. The only difference is now it's a 3/3 elemental instead of a 4/4 elemental, but it's permanent, just like the other Nissa. So now you can still continuously build a army of lands, and again, if you add in indestructible, now you have indestructible lands that are also creatures that still tap for mana. Nissa Who Shakes the World's -8 ability, her ultimate. You get an emblem with lands you control have indestructible. There you go. Now your lands are indestructible, and they're also creatures that can tap for mana, but can also deal damage at the same time. Search your library for any number of forest cards, put them onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. So Nissa Who Shakes the World and Nissa Worldwaker, 2 great Nissas to have for that reason. You can create an army of lands, you can create an army of elementals that are still lands. And at the same time, you can still tap them and buff up your Omnath, and keep on rinse and repeating that cycle, allowing you to do a crazy amount of great stuff. The last Nissa I have in this deck is Nissa Voice of Zendikar. So she's not as great as the other 2, but still a key part to have in a mana ramp deck. So her +1 is you put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield. Yeah, that's okay. Her -2, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. That's fine. It's a good thing to have. -7, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of lands you control. That right there can be amazing. For example, if you pop off Nissa Worldwaker, or if you pop off Nissa Who Shakes the World, now you have all your lands out on the field. You pop off Nissa Voice of Zendikar, now you have an insane amount of draw power. Now you can draw as many cards as you want, and if you have no maximum hand size, you can get that from, let's say, Reliquary Tower. Now you have no maximum hand size. now you can basically do anything in your hand as long as you have the mana for it. And if you were ramping up Omnath this entire time with gaining an insane amount of unspent mana in your mana pool, now you have an army of untapped mana to use to cast spells in your hand, and you have an insane amount of unspent mana in your mana pool that you can use to cast spells. So this combination right here, it is a way for you to just absolutely terrify your opponents. You can do an amazing amount of just anything at that point. So we're gonna keep on going, talking about a couple more things. One thing that I definitely want to add, one thing that you would definitely want to add in a mana ramp deck is stuff like Reclaim the Waste, which would be what we call I'm having a brain fart. Fetch. So what we call fetch lands. So for example, Reclaim the Waste is a sorcery. You tap 1 green. You can also pay for its kicker cost, which is 3 colorless. You search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. If this spell was kicked, search your library for 2 basic land cards instead of 1. You want to have as many of these as possible in any mana ramp deck because of, you're gonna want to. You're gonna want to be able to pull out as much mana as possible. And if you have multiple mana or multiple lands in your hand, it's always good to have cards like this. Exploration. It's a 1-drop enchantment, and you may play additional lands on each of your turns. This is a great thing to have turn 1, because if you pull out your hand, you have mana, let's say 2 or 3 mana in your hand, and you have this, you can play your first forest, tap it, play exploration, and because of exploration's ability allowing you to pull or play an additional land every turn, now you just played an additional land. Now you're a step of the game. You have 2 mana while everyone else has 1 or possibly 0. So it's a quick way to get ahead of the game. A couple of just good cards to have in general for a mana rep is stuff like Scape Shift. So Scape Shift says search any number of lands, search your library for up to that many, sacrifice any number of lands, search your library for up to that many land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So for example, if you have 5 lands on the battlefield, you tap 4, play Scape Shift, sacrifice all 5 lands, search your library, put 5 more lands on the battlefield. Now some of you might think, that's kind of pointless, why would I do that? Well, I'm going to explain. So the reason why you would do that is for cards like Vine-Lancer Kudzu and I know I have it in here. Well, I forgot to pull it out. So anyway, there's cards out there. I forget exactly what the name is. Sure, I can find it. Here it is. Splendid Reclamation. So, as I was saying, you play Scape Shift. You sacrifice all lands you control, and then you put that many lands back onto the battlefield. Now, Vine-Lancer Kudzu says whenever a land enters the battlefield and you control, you put a +1/+1 on him. He's a 2-drop 1/1, but every time a land enters the battlefield, it gets stronger. So now, you just sacrificed 5 lands, brought 5 lands back on, he gained +5/+5. Then you activate Splendid Reclamation and return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Now you just took those 5 that you sacrificed, paid them back on the field, giving him another +5/+5. He just went from a 1/1 to an 11/11. So, and there's many more reasons that you may want to do that. Not just Vine-Lancer Kudzu, but there might be plenty more reasons. I know there's plenty more reasons in my deck. Another good card to have is cards like Sylvan Awakening. So Sylvan Awakening says, until your next turn, all lands you control become 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, and haste, and they're still lands. So if you have, let's say, 35 lands on the field, you can tap this card for 3, turn all your lands into 2/2 elementals with indestructible and haste, and then you can just swing out completely. Let's see. A couple other good things to have is Boundless Realm. It's a 7-drop. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of lands you control. Always a good card to have. So for example, well, for one, it costs us 7 to cast it. So if you have 7 lands on the field, you tap 7, cast that card, now you have 14 lands on the field. Couple other good things to have is Seedborn Muse. Seedborn Muse is a great card to have because you untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. So now, as soon as you pass your turn, it becomes your opponent's turn. Your opponent goes through their normal upkeep, untap, draw phase, main phase 1, combat phase, main phase 2. They move to their end step. Seedborn Muse activates. Now everything that you have is now untapped and ready to go. So if you're playing in a pod with multiple opponents, now you are good to go. You know, if anyone wants to attack you, now you have a complete board set up ready for anything. If you have destruction spells in your hand, now all your lands are now untapped again, so now you can go ahead and cast something out of your hand to completely just throw your opponent off balance. A good combo to have in a mana ramp deck. It's not technically elves, but like I said, I don't think I was going to be able to throw a lot of elves in here anyway. Don't get me wrong, elves are really good for mana ramp, but there are better things. So, good combo to have is Scute Swarm and Scute Mob. So these two can get out of control extremely quickly. So let's start with Scute Mob. So Scute Mob is a 1-drop 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you control 5 or more lands. You put 4 +1/+1 counters on 4 +1/+1 counters on Scute Mob. So with that being said, beginning your upkeep, which I've already gone and explained to y'all how quick and how easy it is to pull lands out of a green mana ramp deck. So you can pull 5, 6, 7 lands out of your deck completely easily. So with Scute Mob on the field, if you control 5 or more lands, you put 4 +1/+1 counters on. That's every upkeep. So every upkeep, this guy is going to get ridiculously strong. Another good one to talk about in that combo is Scute Mob. So Scute Mob says this. It's a 3-drop 1/1. It has a landfall ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under you control, you create a 1/1 green insect creature token. However, if you control 6 or more lands, you create a token that's a copy of Scute Swarm instead. Now this guy can get out of control before anyone can ever realize it. So what this means is, so let's say he comes out. I don't have 6 or more lands right now, but you can about imagine where I'm going with this. So Scute Swarm comes out. Okay. Let's say you threw another land onto the battlefield. Usually, you would just make a 1/1 green insect token. However, if you would have 6 or more lands out on the battlefield already, you can make a copy of Scute Swarm, and then whenever a land enters the battlefield again, this will activate twice. Now you have 4 copies of Scute Swarm. Another land enters the battlefield, it activates 4 times. Now you have 8 copies of Scute Swarm. You see where I'm going with this. You can make an army of Scute Swarms, and it could just get out of control. You know, the whole 1/1 thing doesn't really sound intimidating, but let me tell you, if you are swinging at somebody with 2,000 1/1s, that's going to hurt regardless of what they do. Alright, a couple more things we can talk about. I'm not going to go too far into any more detail. This video is kind of running long, so I'm going to be wrapping it up pretty soon. Another thing to have, kind of like Seedborn Muse, is Wilderness Reclamation. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. Yeah, it's a great thing to have. You always have mana available. Ashia Soul of the Wild. Its power and toughness each equal to the number of lands you control and non-token creatures you control, or forest lands in addition to their other types. This can combo off really good because now not only your lands can tap for mana, but your creatures can tap for mana as well. allowing you to buff up your commander, which would be Omnath, Locust, and Mana. Rampaging Ballets. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under you control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. Always good to have. Token generation. Mutani Yavi Maha's Avatar. Has reach and trample, and it gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land card in your graveyard. So this is something to have for building strong creatures. Reshape the Earth is a 10-drop. Search your library for up to 10 land cards and then put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Just some good fetch lands to have. Blackblade Reforged, legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Now this one is kind of weird. It has equipped legendary creature, only taps for 3. That means if you have a creature out on the battlefield, for example Omnath, because only legendary creatures can be your commander. Omnath is a legendary creature. You tap 2 to put Blackblade Reforge onto the battlefield, and then you tap 3 mana to equip it to Omnath. Now, if you're not trying to equip it to a legendary creature, it's going to cost you 7 to equip it to that creature. So it's always kind of good, especially if you don't have the mana for it, if you don't want to waste the mana for it. It's always good to try and equip it to a legendary creature, save you on a lot of mana. Acidic Slime, I always recommend an Acidic Slime in every green deck or any deck that he can fit in, anyway, simply because 1 has Death Touch, always good to have. And when Acidic Slime enters the battlefield, it destroys target artifact, enchantment, or land. Always good to have enchantment removal and artifact removal. Tajaru Blightblade, it's one of the elves that I actually do have in my deck. It's a 1-drop 1/1 with Death Touch. Good to have him out there as a chump block, something swinging at you really strong. Just block it and get it off the field as quick as possible. So yeah, this is a good detailed information of a green mono ramp deck. If y'all have any questions, or if y'all would like me to do another deck, please do not be afraid to ask. Again, welcome to Magic the Gathering Know-How, and please subscribe, comment, like, anything you would like, and I'll try to get back to you. Thank you.